And I'd ask you to introduce yourself as I sort of ask you the first question, because I think you'll do a much better job at that than I will. Obviously, this conversation just now hopefully will have instilled a couple of thoughts in your head already around maybe this more systemic perspective and the sort of, the dialogue between the public-private partnership and also how you have to go about the long-term thinking as you approach a regenerative city. Lars, I'd like to start with you. You recently set a climate action plan in Copenhagen. So maybe you can share a little bit more about how you went about doing that and how you actually managed the competing priorities as you put that in place.
Okay, first of all, my introduction is I'm the Chief City Architect of Copenhagen. I've been so for 1.5 years. So basically my role is to advise the commission, the politicians and the departments at the municipality on matters regarding urban development and architecture. And so regarding our climate, we have a climate plan and we have a climate action plan, and those are two different things. As the climate plan is our long-term strategy, or it's actually called a climate strategy. The climate strategy is a long-term plan for 2035, and our ambition is to reach net zero on the geographical emission and half our consumption-based emission, which is our kind of a new thing in this climate strategy. And then the climate action plan is the more here and now. What do we do for the next 3 to 4 years to set the course on our way to reach the 2035 goal?
And what are some of the trade-offs, I guess, as you were putting that in place, that you had to navigate?
We got a lot of help to develop the climate plan from C40 and other, obviously, stakeholders also. Our local community, the local industry played a significant role in formulating the climate strategy. And it's also important for me to say that it doesn't stand on its own. It's actually 1 out of 8 strategies that we are developing at the moment, so it has to work together on a broader strategic level, also thinking about architecture, planning, urban nature, urban life, mobility, climate adaptation, and so forth. So what is important for us is that we have clear goals on climate issues, but also that it has to work together with a number of other strategies that we are working with.
I'd like to come back on that integration point in a minute, but maybe over to you first, Hélène. What are cities doing that, or what makes cities stand out, and why do they succeed in their approaches versus other cities which might struggle a little bit to move towards more of a regenerative approach?
I think the situation is different from one city to another first. I think in some part of the world we are facing a major urban growth, demographic growth and everything. If we try to focus on Europe, because the solution can be different from one context to another. I think in Europe, regenerative approach of the built environment should be the central approach. What does that mean? We know that in Europe there is 2 million of viable brownfield land. That's exactly what the director of GenCo just said. We know there is in Europe 20,000 hectares of empty office spaces. So that's, if you look at the need in terms of housing and these available land and vacant building, if we work around these, we could produce all of the housing that cities need in Europe for the coming 20 years. That means that's really where we should focus our effort, because the most zero carbon building is the one that you don't build, and also where you build is as important as how you build. So for example, we know that a brownfield regeneration project is approximately 40% less carbon intensive than a greenfield development, because it's smaller housing unit, because it's most connected to the transport, because it already saves the sequestration carbon power of the nature that you will conserve. And I think the cities who are really trying to bring this regenerative approach in practice are the ones that are most successful. And I want to give a few examples here, I think. If you start from Paris, for example, I think Paris has, for example, a new bioclimatic master plan right now. And there is really this systemic approach that they try to have not just a few projects, but it needs to be the new rules. There is new rules in the new master plan of Paris that say demolition, it really should be like not the norm anymore. So if you want to demolish and rebuild, you need to justify it very hard why you were not able to transform and everything. They have also identified 600 new existing building, commercial area, offices that they won't be able to transform without integrating some residential area and everything. On broad Finland, there is a lot of cities who are trying to also reverse this form of urban sprawl that we are seeing a lot in Europe. Urban sprawl is actually the most effective, fighting urban sprawl is the most effective way to reduce emission in Europe and in North America right now. If you take the example from the other side of the Atlantic in Portland, for example, they have just put an urban growth boundary, so they can't anymore extend the city, and they have totally reversed all of their single-family zoning. So before, it was allowed only to develop single-family. Now, they have to develop multi-family building, and they have allow a lot of redevelopment of like dividing parcel and everything to really try to support a form of gentle densification. And it's working a lot from a GHG emission perspective, but it's also working a lot in terms of housing production, because mathematically they can produce much more housing and affordable housing than the one they were developing before.
And I think it's great, the example that you showcased there of Portland, and also how there's much more of a move towards reusing sites and reconversion. Also a little bit to the work that Bruno was talking about, what he does with his organization. It's becoming really important to think, I guess, creatively or differently, rather than just say, let's throw it out and start new. Lars, maybe just coming back also to you, that point of integration and the different priorities that you're sort of balancing in the climate plans. It takes decades to put strategies in place and then implement them. And you talked about the long-term plan, the short-term plan. But of course, the politics and everything changes. You know, there's political cycles, leadership changes. How do you go about managing that when you're trying to construct something successfully? What are the lessons learned that you can share with the audience here today?
I think we need to combine long-term thinking and short-term action. I think that's kind of a very easy way to put it, but I think you should know that, you know, Copenhagen being kind of a very livable city now and very successful in many ways, it didn't come out of nothing. Like 40 years ago, we were almost bankrupt. We were a heavy polluted city.
Interesting.
And so at that time, out of necessity, out of that crisis that was present at that time, a lot of important decisions and strategies were made, and that is the reason why we have succeeded in a transformation. So we need to take courageous decisions now for the future, but we also need to act quick. And to do so, we need to support experiments. We need to do our own experiments, but we also need to engage citizens and stakeholders much more to enable them to do their own proposals and own projects, because we cannot, as a municipality, direct all new actions alone. We need to work together. So partnerships is a very important key word for us right now. In Copenhagen, we are establishing a number of partnerships to engage industries and local citizens in sharing knowledge and working together. So that's one of the many steps that I have on my list here that we're doing at the moment.
And I think one of the themes that's really coming out quite strongly for me across all the panels is how many people it takes to work together, to collaborate, to move towards a more regenerative city or more regenerative built environment. And the role also that everyone has to play in that journey, and then the sort of need to think outside the box. I think it's a really important point to make. Hélène, what do you see as some of the sort of key obstacles that need to really be overcome? What is not working well today to actually, to Lars's point, make the decisions and speed up now, for things which will matter in the future?
I think that's exactly, we know C40, we are a climate organization, but we don't want always to discuss with cities about what you need to do. We also need to work with them on the barrier and the challenge of why it's not happening. If we take the example of brownfield regeneration, for example, we know the land is available in Europe. We know there is a fantastic portfolio of brownfield regeneration. Here in Paris, you can say Batignolles. In Copenhagen, you can say Nordhaven and King's Cross, where it has been super successful from percentage of affordable housing, sustainability goals, but also very attractive in terms of investment. But why these projects are not happening, that's exactly where we need to focus. And I think there is a lot of things that we could learn from Copenhagen. There is some things that has been said before. There is some city who say, oh, we need to remove the environmental policies to accelerate development of this type. I don't think this is a problem. I think the real problem is the speed. It was mentioned before. I think it's important. And also find some way to isolate, if I can say that, insulate this project from the political change. And I think that's very things that in Copenhagen you have done with really creating a specific development vehicle that is connected to the city, where the city sets the rule, sets the vision, but then the implementation will be led by the development agency, who will be able to continue and not follow the political agenda and everything. And that has been exactly, I think, very successful. So there is a lot of very small thing, fast-track process that was mentioning in the previous panel, that really city must work to show to the investor, to show to developer that if they are going in the right direction, if they are accepting sustainable objective, social objective, they will be supported in the development of this project. And I think that's very, very important to work around this. And actually, we are creating a network of cities in Europe and other parts of the world to really work together around this type of assess. And the trust is also very important. I think the trust between the private sector and public sector today is a bit is a big problem, and I think there is a lot of learn as well from the Nordic country on these.
Can you talk maybe, Lars, a little bit about the vehicle that Hélène spoke about? Could you explain a little bit how you managed to bifurcate the strategy part and the vision part and the implementation part?
I think what is, maybe to start in another way, what is really important is to create a mindset that is understandable for everybody. The solutions are super complex. They're technically complex, they're economically complex, they're politically complex. So it's difficult for everybody to understand. Maybe none of us really understand, but because it's so complex. Yeah. So we need to kind of step a little bit away from complexity and try to develop a clear mindset of which explaining where we're going. And it has to be so clear so everybody understands. So we have developed a vision at the technical department at the Copenhagen municipality that is actually written in more or less 5 pages. It's super simple. Maybe it's too simple, but everybody can understand. Yeah. So that's the first thing you need to do. Then you need to be able to think across all the dilemmas that appears when you start developing the city, because we have a housing crisis in Copenhagen like all other major cities in the Western world. But we also have the climate issue, and these two things don't really work well together. So we need to prioritize how to come about our housing crisis while at the same time taking care of our climate is a difficult task. Then to do so, we need to think across all the different aspects that we need to deliver on, but we also need to prioritize. So I have this saying at the moment. Actually, again, to make it very simple, we only have 2 challenges in Copenhagen, which is the climate and the housing. All other challenges, and we have a lot, how to handle waste and garbage and resources, energy, mobility, and so forth. they're kind of results or results of those two major challenges that we have. Then we have to talk about that when we do projects. How do they deliver on that vision that we have? Even the smallest project, putting a bin in a park, should answer to that question. If we cannot answer that question, how does it support the vision? Then we should rethink it. So that's why it's so important to have a very clear mindset. I know it's easier for me to sit here and say than it is in an everyday life, but we have to strive for making this clear mindset in order to make the priorities in our way of developing the city.
Well, you did say that Copenhagen started off in a difficult place. So I think it's, when you say it's easy for you to say that, we know that where you started wasn't so easy. So I think you're okay to...
Yeah, and again, just to add up on what Hélène was talking about, we have a very simple saying also, maintain or explain. It's kind of a strategy, which means we should start looking upon what we have to take care of that, to use it as much as possible, to take advantage and use, as India also stated, how can we enable ourselves to use our square meters much better. But also, there's also a point forward in that sentence, is that when we build, we should also, it should be something that can last, that we can actually maintain for the future. So we start with looking at what we have, use what we have, and if we can't find the right solutions within our current stake, then we build new. And when we build new, obviously we should do it with a long-term perspective and as climate friendly as possible.
I think that's really important, so we don't find ourselves in 100 years back on the stage with the same sort of discussion about what we need to be doing. Maybe just as we sort of finish off, Hélène, coming back again to the theme of change now, and also just all the different people in the room, your broad audience, what is one piece of advice that you give cities or people that start off in this space to help shape a more regenerative built environment and help shape more regenerative cities? What's the one piece of advice that you'd like to leave people with here today?
I think I want to say something. I don't think we are speaking here about innovation. I think the European model of cities was, all of the cities we like, Copenhagen, London, Paris, and everything, they have very different architecture, but they have a very similar urban fabric. They are compact, they are walkable, they are mixed in their use, mixed in the people and everything. But I think we have lost our ways. We need, in the previous century, introduction of car, all of the story we know. I think what is important is to come back in some way to this model that is the cities that are still very attractive and that work both for the environment and also are very attractive for people. So take every opportunity we have to consolidate this form of European living. And then there is a second thing that I wanted to mention. I think we also need to work collectively on empty space and making the most of existing space. In Paris, in France, there is around 9% of housing that are empty. Not everyone in Paris and in France, and 10% of secondary home. If you take these 10 to 20%, that means you can already resolve the housing crisis and everything. So how we act, and there is a coalition of European cities that we are supporting right now about working on short-term rental, working on home tax, really trying also to incentivize adaptive reuse. A city like London, for example, you don't need permit anymore. If you want to transform an offices building into a housing, if you have certain conditions, you can skip some permit. In Los Angeles, they have also developed tax incentives. So there is all of this mindset is very important. And again, it's not technology, it's not innovation, it's really about coming back to what worked for centuries in our European cities.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. Lars, maybe one last word. What's your piece of advice? And then I think we'll have to close off today.
Four sentences or four slogans in the end. So have a clear vision, think long-term, act short-term, and engage all stakeholders.
Perfect. Thank you so much to both of you, and thank you so much to all of you for being here today.